We have perfect competition, some of the agricultural products, but we also have mixtures of imperfections of competition, of monopoly. Now that's not a new thing in the American scene. In fact, it got started around Teddy Roosevelt's time, at the turn of the century. There was a terrific trust movement, a tendency towards merger, towards agglomeration, with the big getting bigger and the smaller being squeezed out.
Is that pattern continuing?
Our best estimate is that there is still a good deal of that pattern in the American economy, but contrary to what we used to believe, it is not growing worse. If anything, the evidence suggests that it's getting slightly better, that competition is increasing a little bit in the American system. On the other hand, the tremendous steam for thoroughgoing reform, which characterized so much of European history since the beginning of this century, and which was an important political influence in the United States during the 1930s, that seems to have subsided for the moment. There's a good deal of evidence that, contrary to what Karl Marx believed, that capitalism would develop with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Contrary to that, there's a good deal of evidence in the last 20, 25, 30 years that there is a greater equalitarian distribution of income in the United States. We're in a recession now in 1958. After very carefully diagnosing this situation, the statesman comes up with the answer that this is not the time to reduce the public debt. This is not the time to run a large budgetary surplus. Perhaps this is not even the time to run a balanced budget, but that in a year like the present year, there should be, as a matter of careful public policy, not pursuing anything rash, there should be a budgetary deficit. Can you imagine any politician with the nerve who will come right out and say this quite as bluntly as I've been saying it?
When the economy is producing at or near full employment, there is a good deal of discretion for corporations to raise prices, and there's a good deal of opportunity for unions to get wage increases, and that these two work on each other. The familiar wage-price spiral. And I don't think that we have this problem licked by a long shot.
Do you have any intimation of the direction in which the solution might take?
I think sooner or later we will come to grips with it via a wage-price policy that will be set by the government and to which, by one form of pressure or another, possibly coupled with a good deal of negotiation, unions and management will conform. This doesn't mean, incidentally, massive price and wage regulation. It means setting standards and conforming to these standards. I think that it would be a good thing if we had a social insurance system which assured people of a fairly constant standard of living through their old age. That's one type. There are other things in Social Security that need improvement. Our unemployment compensation system isn't very satisfactory at the present time. To go to another extreme, let's talk about business regulation as such. Some of my best friends are ad men. Also, some of the most interesting people I've ever known are. I would be a little worried, and I continue to be a little worried, at the amount of energy that we have to devote to the manufacture, development, and synthesis of wants. In recent years, we've been increasing advertising outlays at the rate of about $1 billion a year. This is in order to persuade people of what they need, what they want. And I must say I'm a little bit worried about this. I'm worried about how long we can go on with this rather frantic activity. And I would hope that we might get over in the future to satisfying some of the wants on which we're doing rather badly and that we would then need to have to spend a little less energy on selling things of which people are unaware of their need. When we shift over to another side of the economy, our schools, roads I just mentioned, our urban communities, our police forces, all of these important civic enterprises, nothing very new, nothing novel about them, they're all old. These we find all very poorly provided for. This leads me to the conclusion, which I've argued in this book at some length, that we have no satisfactory mechanism, particularly as far as state and local governments are concerned, for getting our production balanced as between these important local services and our private supply of goods. Now, I suppose there are some people who will say that to spend more money on public schools is socialist. Well, nonsense. This is a misuse of, this is an effort to avoid being practical by resort to terms that have an evil sound. And this, I would say, was part of a more general misconception. The feeling that the private enterprise economy is a very precious and fragile thing, and that if you get the least bit out of line, if you modify it in any way, it will collapse. This, I'm sure, is not true. I'm sure that this is a very rugged piece of machinery. And I would even go so far as to urge that when private want production is properly complemented by what we economists call social capital, by a good educational system, by lots of scientific research, by the provision of good roads and good highways and so forth, that then it works better. That along with investment in things, we must have investment in people.
I'm proud of the things that we've done together to curb inflation, to curb depression, and to liberalize our trade agreements. But I've found the economists ahead of our political leaders on each of these points, being in wide agreement on next steps that we need to take in each area. I think the most interesting new thought, however, that has come to me in this exploration relates to Professor Galbraith's point that as a nation we are rich in things but poor in services. We have more food than we can eat, more cars than we can park, and enough television sets to drive us all cross-eyed. At the same time, however, we're desperately poor in school teachers, policemen, psychiatrists, and social workers, to say nothing of our need for schools and slum clearance. How we can put these things ahead of bigger tail fins or better filter tips, I don't know. But I'm sure that it's the next great step required of our economy.